So, David, we're joined by a special guest from the land of enchantment.
Oh, could that be New Mexico?
That is New Mexico. Rachel, thanks for joining us.
I'm impressed by both of your Four Corners trivia. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
if nothing else, David and I were really good at like naming state capitals and probably know more about like state logos and things, but that's for another discussion. So we're going to jump right in because we have a lot to cover. And speaking of sort of monikers, Rachel, what's going on with IOTA?
So, very exciting news. In late 2024, CMMI released the final rule for the proposed increasing organ transplant access model, which is something that ASN has been advocating for, I would argue, for about 15 years, starting back to the formation of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, when we really argued that transplant care is part of kidney care and vice versa. So, with the finalization of the IOTA model, which ASN strongly advocated for, we're pleased to see many of our priorities included. First and foremost, I think this model has been streamlined from the original proposal and really homes in on the singular goal of increasing access to kidney transplantation, the optimal therapy for most Americans. David, what highlights would you add?
Rachel, the thing about it is you and I both at different times and different parts, we've been involved in this conversation. It strikes me that it's like everything imaginable was like creating a new diagnostic group where, DRG was considered and tried out. And in the end, there were a lot of pieces that they just said that just clunks it up. And so they really did fully streamline it. That is, I think, the message of exactly of this model, wouldn't you say?
I would. I would also add that success is a lot easier in the model as finalized for the roughly 50% of transplant centers that will be enrolled on a mandatory basis. Um, Aligned almost exactly with ASN's advocacy, CMMI increased the maximum upside for any single kidney transplant for a participant from a mere $8,000 to $15,000. They also addressed some of the issues with the math to make success more, well, mathematically possible for the participants. So we as ASN really like the direction that this model is headed in and think it could significantly help ASN members, general and transplant nephrologists alike, particularly those who are practicing in an area where transplant centers enrolled in IOTA take advantage of some of these incentives to increase access.
So I guess I can hear your excitement in the fact that CMMI seems to have listened to ASN and other members of the community as they finalized this model. I guess my question would be, given the challenges with other CMMI models, how can we ensure that IOTA will be more successful?
Honestly, Todd, I put that right back on us at ASN. I think we have a responsibility, which we fully intend to deliver on, to help our members, division chiefs, transplant nephrologists, general nephrologists who might consider becoming IOTA collaborators, to fully understand the model, understand how it could benefit them, change their practice, and prepare to succeed. CMMI has really teed this up in an attempt to be a win-win-win for the agency, the participants, and the patients. I think the onus is now on us to help our community deliver and succeed.
So, given the timing of this discussion, I have to ask the question about the change of administration from the Biden administration to Trump too. What's likely to happen in terms of CMMI and how the agency may change moving forward, specifically related to the IOTA model?
I think we're in a period of known unknowns. In other words, we know there's a lot that we don't know about what leadership appointments will look like and overall healthcare goals for the incoming administration. But what we do know is that the first Trump administration was incredibly positive about opportunities to increase kidney health, leaned into CMMI as a tool to help do that, and specifically underscored increasing access to transplantation as a top goal of the Advancing American Kidney Health Initiative executive order. So, based on the facts that we do have at hand, I think we have every reason to expect that the incoming administration will continue to want to prioritize increasing access to kidney transplant. And if there are tweaks around the margins of this model, the core focus will remain in place.
I was going to jump in on something because I think you hit really a really excellent point earlier, Rachel, about the change on the math and the reimbursement to really provide the incentives that are needed. So I have to put on my hat from over at the quality committee and just say, but there were some things that were a bit murky about quality measures that have been proposed. And I think you and I are in agreement that this, what they've done is probably streamlined it in a positive way. Can you address that?
Yeah, couldn't agree more, David. In a nutshell, there were a number of quality measures that were proposed for the model that we didn't feel necessarily had a strong evidence base and were unlikely to deliver benefit to patients relative to the administrative burden that would be landed on the participants in the model. So happily, CMMI axed all of those quality measures that we didn't like from the proposed rule. And in the final rule have really focused on looking at a rolling composite graft survival rate, which allows centers to shift their thinking or complement their thinking from looking at 90-day and 1-year outcomes metrics to the graft health of their entire patient population over the 6-year duration of the model.
Okay, so real fast, what about the double-edged sword that we got? We got something we really liked around transparency on the criteria, but not something we also had wanted on organ sharing offers. So can you give us a little bit of background there?
So the good news is that something ASN's been calling for a long time, inside and outside of CMMI, is that transplant centers that are participating in the model will have to make it crystal clear what their acceptance criteria are to gain access to their waitlist, helping patients determine which center might be the best fit for them and making the overall system more navigable. That's a win. Unfortunately, a proposal to share information with patients retrospectively about offers for kidneys that were made for them and declined on their behalf came out of the final model. I think transplant centers had expressed some concerns about the administrative burden associated with that, understandable, but also probably surmountable with the right, payment support from CMS. So that's a goal that we as ASN will continue to advocate on a nationwide basis in the years to come.
Rachel, since you mentioned the known unknowns, the quote from Donald Rumsfeld, who of course retired to New Mexico, why don't we continue our sort of tour around the four corners and stay with transplant, move to ASN's legislative priorities, and can you just give us sort of a quick update on hold and some changes at HRSA?
Thanks, Todd. So we're recording this podcast on Wednesday, December 18th, which means that yesterday, Congress unveiled a gigantic end-of-year spending package that it has to pass or the government will shut down. And in typical congressional fashion, these end-of-year packages often include a number of other priorities that are agreed upon on a bipartisan, bicameral basis. And thanks to ASN's advocacy across the entirety of the 118th Congress in the last 2 years, as well as in the last 6 or so weeks, as this end-of-year package was coming together, not one, but two of the Society's top legislative priorities for the year have been included in what we hope will pass, averting a government shutdown. You just named one of them, Todd, the HOLD Act, the Honor Our Living Donors Act. In a nutshell, this bill would simplify the process of determining which living donors are eligible to receive reimbursement to make sure that they don't face out-of-pocket costs when they donate a kidney to save someone else's life. Huge shout out to Susan Delbene in the House, Senators Lujan of New Mexico and Bozeman of Arkansas in the Senate, as well as leadership, in both chambers for prioritizing this important bill.
So Rachel, I know that's one of the provisions within the end of year package that we advocated for. What's another one related to transplant?
So put on your wonky hats, everyone. This one gets a bit technical. Last year, Congress passed a law to kind of overhaul our nation's transplant system. It then occurred to everybody that a technical fix was needed to ensure that as part of this modernization, investment in additional information technology systems, shifts in how the transplant system is governed, the agency under the Department of Health and Human Services that runs the transplant system needed clarification that they could continue to collect a key source of revenue and share it across multiple contractors who are responsible for running our nation's transplant system. And happily, thanks to leadership in the Energy and Commerce Committee, Senator Grassley, Senator Cassidy, as well as the Senate Finance Committee. This clarification, this technical fix, has also been included in the draft text for the end of year spending package, meaning that HHS can continue to implement the law that Congress wants, as well as modernize our transplant system and have the money to do so.
Thanks, Rachel. As I think about the technical corrections that you mentioned related to HRSA and the Health Resources and Services Administration, I'm really struck by the fact that transplant policy, while mostly housed at HRSA, is spread across HHS. And so as we think about next year and the discussions around government efficiency, there really may be an opportunity to try to consolidate and hopefully increase the efficiency and the effectiveness of transplant policy. The other point that you've sort of helped me understand, which I think is really important, is not only do these end of year packages keep the government open so we avoid a shutdown, but they also do address these technical issues that, while wonky, as you said, are really important to a well-functioning government. So there's a lot in sort of your comments that I think it's important for us to tease out in future episodes. I guess as we sort of turn the corner to the third of our four corners discussion, and David, I'm curious about the other two aspects of this end of year package that relate to the nephrology community.
Okay. Well, they relate to nephrology and they relate to health care overall. So one thing that is really critical, I'm going to start with the really good news, is that they are going to extend the telehealth provisions that have been put in place that were set to expire at the end of December 2024. They are now extending them to expire at the end of December 2026. So that's another 2 years, but that means that everyone in the House of Medicine is going to have to be collecting its data, its studies, whatever it can to demonstrate the value of telehealth. So that when we get to 2 years from now, there's a reason for Congress to support a more permanent change and also for CMS to support that as well. The other issue has been the physician fee schedule. We have been receiving cuts on a regular basis for quite some time in the Medicare physician fee schedule. And that's led us to a very precipitous point in terms of Medicare's reimbursement of physicians over the last 20 years. So there was another cut in store for 2025 that was a 2.85% cut. Now 2.5% has been returned, and so it's more like a 0.3% remaining. So it's some help, but I don't think we would call it a victory. The issue will be back to us again next year as to whether or not Congress finally deals with making the Medicare physician fee schedule adjusted for inflation, which it is the only major program within Medicare that does not have an inflation adjustment. And we will continue working on that.
Thanks, David. That's really interesting in terms of, in some ways, in normal circumstances, I think this would seem like a really important step forward. But I assume part of the concern in your voice relates to what's likely to happen next year as the Trump administration is trying to offset tax cuts with balancing the budget and looking for pay-fors. And in the middle of this, you have the physician fee schedule, which is really kind of different from a lot of other payments. I mean, am I sort of describing that correctly?
You are. A dynamic could certainly be set up in which Medicare is in a situation where the physicians are fighting with the hospitals, and the hospitals are fighting with the rehabilitation facilities and the long-term nursing care facilities. It's just really not a very healthy way to set up the whole paradigm for discussion. But we will see, and that has been ongoing for quite some time in the way in which Medicare is structured and the politics around Medicare. Probably the big loser will end up being not necessarily Medicare, but Medicaid.
Yeah.
They'll probably take the bigger hits.
Yeah, and I think for a future episode, we should really focus specifically on Medicaid. I was at a meeting recently with my counterpart, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and as you can imagine, that's their number one issue. So thinking about next year is, preparing for likely Medicaid cuts, which also affect people with kidney diseases. I guess as we move to the fourth corner and our sort of journey starting in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and working our way around the Southwest. We've talked about IOTA in the final rule and how many changes were made in the final rule by CMMI, many of which were advocated for by ASN. We've talked about two different sets of inclusions in the end of year package, two around transplant policy and then telehealth and the physician's fee schedule. And now we're at the fourth point. And Rachel, you have the last word. So we're going to go out in the interest of time with your explanation of this final issue in the final corner in the Southwest.
So here in New Mexico, we have a saying that we live in the land of mañana, and you can interpret that two different ways. You can either put off doing anything till tomorrow, or you can start thinking about tomorrow today. And that is exactly what ASN is doing as we close out the 118th Congress in 2024. So you just heard that the ink has not even yet been laid on paper for the end of year spending package, but in partnership with some congressional champions, including the Congressional Kidney Caucus co-chairs Susan Delbene and Larry Bouchon, we have helped to craft new legislation introduced just this month, which will be reintroduced in the 119th Congress for consideration, that would expand eligibility for living donors to receive reimbursement from the government program that exists to help offset or cover costs and make kidney donation a cost-neutral act. This legislation would significantly expand who can actually get that reimbursement, lift the total amount of costs that can be reimbursed, and it would reauthorize the entire program, which, to your earlier point about 2025 and beyond certainly being a year where Congress and the administration are looking for places to cut, unauthorized programs are a prime place to start. So by shoring up this, the National Living Donor Assistance Center's congressional authorization to continue to operate, we protect and also expand its ability to help Americans who are interested in donating a kidney. So that will be one of our top priorities going into 2025.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. And I appreciate you joining us from the Land of Enchantment. David, as always, thank you for co-hosting with me. And Lauren, thank you for producing us. And just wanted to wish all of you and all of our listeners happy holidays. And we look forward to reconvening in 2025. Thank you.
This podcast is copyrighted by the American Society of Nephrology. All rights reserved. All content in this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be medical advice. This podcast should not be used in a medical emergency or for the diagnosis or treatment of any medical condition. Please consult your doctor or other qualified healthcare professional if you have any questions about any medical condition or before taking any drug, changing your diet, or commencing or discontinuing any course of treatment. Thank you for listening to this podcast from the American Society of Nephrology.